Welcome to the Popcorn Talk Network, for the online broadcast network that features movie discussion, news, and interviews. Press 1. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies.
I'm opening. We have an eye, sort of a nostril, 2 teeth. One of the teeth has a small cavity. Close call, folks, but I think we got here just in time.
Presented by Maria Menounos and Kevin Undergaro. This is Anatomy of a Movie. In-depth discussions and breakdowns of various movie titles. And now that you've seen the movie, let the dissection begin.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Anatomy of a Movie. Here on Popcorn Talk. As the music swells, so does the sea, because that's where we're headed. In the heart of the sea, where we will find not Moby Dick, but a whale kind of like him.
The inspiration of the whale.
Angry whale.
Very good at tracking whale.
Indeed. Those are the voices of Sara Stretton.
Hello.
Demetri Panos.
Hello, movie fans.
And of course, we have Marisa Serafini.
Hello, everybody.
I don't know if her mic mute button is stuck, but I can't quite hear her perfectly. But maybe that's it. Okay, great. Then
I can hear you, Marisa.
Cool.
I can hear you, Phil.
I've lost my Ant-Man hearing abilities that I
There
joked
you
about
go.
before the show. Anyway, In the Heart of the Sea, Ron Howard directs. Of course, Brian Grazer, right there with him producing it. Let's get into overall thoughts. Who's just jumping at this?
I'll go. I will start by prefacing, I have not read Moby Dick. As a big book fan, that's one I still haven't read. So I think it's actually good for me going into this type of story, realizing how big Moby Dick was as a story, where the inspiration came from. I appreciate it in that light for the film. I think the direction was great. Storylines and character development wasn't quite fully there, but the adventure and the story, and I saw it in Dolby Atmos, so I was like immersed into the sea. I fairly enjoyed it, and I wasn't sure. I went into it with, I don't know what my expectations were, but I walked out, I was like, hey, that was actually pretty fun.
Interesting. So I did read Moby Dick, but I was one of those kids who read it far too early to really appreciate it. Kind of like how I read Great Expectations. When I feel like my reading level wasn't even high enough to read it, just because it was kind of forced on you as like part of your education.
So what was your age?
I might be wrong, but I feel like I read this in like 6th grade or like 5th grade.
Oh, that would have been a hard, tough read.
Exactly. And it was just a couple years. I remember also feeling the same thing kind of about Great Expectations, where I was like, or Tale of Two Cities, like they just put it on you too young. So my memory of Moby Dick is not in fondness. It's like, oh, they made me read that book. And like, oh yeah, there's a whale. Like, that's what I was going into. For the movie, I felt a little off. I thought when I saw the posters for this movie, it looked really grand. It looked really beautiful. So I don't know what I was expecting. I think I was expecting to feel more like Life of Pi emotions, like cheering for your protagonist, like
Eat the tiger!
Eat the tiger.
But I was
If only they had a tiger.
I was like,
it might have helped the
I was
situation.
like, all the posters looked really beautiful, and like I was getting prepared for some really nice like ocean shots and sun. I don't know what I was thinking, because then I got into it and constantly was like, oh my gosh, I'm so disgusted by what's happening in this movie. Like it was
by whaling itself.
By whaling, by cannibalism. Spoilers.
Well, we are a spoiler show.
I know, but so there was so much. So for me, the tone didn't mesh. Because on one hand, and I think it sticks, how it was shot, how it was marketed. Yes, I know this Moby Dick. I know we're talking about survival and death and whatnot. But I thought it was going to be in a way more elegant. And how it was happening, I thought deserved a more gritty tone. The incidents that were occurring. So there was like just a mix of my emotions.
This was PG-13? Couldn't have been R. They didn't show
I'm pretty sure it
cannibalism.
was.
I mean, they didn't show it like they did in Alive. So, yeah.
I should probably know this.
I mean, I didn't feel that it was anything I didn't feel that it was anything more than an R or more than a PG-13.
I would hope that's not more than not.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it seemed PG-13.
Marissa's looking it up as we speak.
But so that was the issue for me. I was interested in the story.
PG-13.
I was having visceral reactions, which is always a good thing for me in movies. But I was kind of being torn between how they were filming and like the heroic, beautiful portrayal of it, and like the disgusting acts that were actually happening. So I left being kind of like, eh.
Okay.
That's what my reaction to this film was.
All right.
Interesting. I read the book. I read the book upon recommendation from my brother, who doesn't even read all the
In the Heart of the Sea.
In the Heart of the Sea.
Not Moby Dick.
Not Moby Dick. I'll get into my history with Moby Dick, and it's like, but I read the book, and it's an engrossing story of human survival, and it was a story that I hadn't known about, and it's in the heart of the sea, the tragic sinking of the Essex, and how it was inspiration for Moby Dick. So you know that there's going to be a whale in there, but what the book, and I think wisely in the marketing of this movie, they really stayed away from the cannibalism aspect of it. But as you're reading the book, it makes sense as to the events that happened, and in the book it seemed to me far more dire. Far more dire situation. I was looking forward to the movie, and I guess for the most part I did enjoy it. I liked it. Things that bothered me, I guess, were I'm not entirely sure that they were able to capture really a lot of the direness of their situation. Like, they were so far out at sea. Like, they had been the farthest that any whaling boat from Nantucket had ever been, and they were completely lost. Like, so far off. And by circumstance, by like just stupid circumstance, they were actually passing by islands that they wanted to try to go to, but since having no means of navigation, like, it was just like they just kept on floating. And so when you get to the cannibalism part, and seeing how the two crews or the two boats were dealing with it, it was very engrossing, and I mean that as it was engrossing and it was gross. And the thing, Phil Brooker wrote the book, goes into detail of what could drive a person to do that. So the movie, I felt, was, obviously PG-13. It sort of kind of pulled back from a lot of the gruesomeness of this, but I think at the same time, it also took away from me anyways, like the direness. And so when they finally get rescued, like, the psychological impact that's on these men and such. And the whole thing with the whale is fascinating. For me, Moby Dick, as a kid, I had, similar to Ron Howard. Ron Howard had stated, my familiarity with Moby Dick is the John Huston movie, starring Gregory Peck as Captain Ahab. So that movie as a kid, I watched every time that it was on TV, and I had like a kid's book of Moby Dick, which I, constantly reread, and, because the story of a big white whale and crashing a ship, and
from Boston and
from Boston and Nantucket, and going to Nantucket as a kid, seeing the whales and all this stuff, like, so it was sort of kind of a big thing as a little kid. And again, it gets to your point too. If you're in 6th grade to read the Melville Moby Dick, like, that is packed with so much themes, symbolism. You're just not going to get that. And of course, none of that was in a kid's book of it, like a little kid's pop-up book. Of course, it's just about a white whale attacking the ship.
Well, I got the same message from the kid that the kids' book gave, so we're on the same page.
But it was an exciting tale. The way John Huston filmed his, Moby Dick was it's this adventure tale coming out of Nantucket. So, there was interest for me. So when my brother recommended the book, I said, all right, I'll check it out. Really liked it. So I went into this movie, and while there were some differences, they took some liberties, and I get that. There was a dramatic element that was sort of kind of missing for me. The other thing that annoyed me, Chris Hemsworth, in and out Boston accent.
I was like, is he going for one? I can't tell.
He tried, and right off the bat, I like Chris Hemsworth. I think he's a great presence on screen in most anything that he does. He's a really great actor. He's worked with Ron Howard before. We talked about Rush. I thought he was amazing in Rush. Obviously, he's Thor. In this movie, I think you can either go either way with a Boston accent. Some people can nail it. Some people can't. And there's got to be a point where you just say, you know what, we're just going to ace the accent. Just don't do it. And if you don't do it, then you don't have the opportunity for people like me to point and go, it was cringeworthy at times for me. His performance was good. It was just his accent.
It also, like, his accent changed through the sections of the film. Like, you could tell when they were on kind of different locations. Mm-hmm. He kind of got into a different rhythm with his speech.
Yeah.
I was like, is he going for that?
It's stuck out for me.
I would say this, right? For me, the movie opens up with, the two characters, one of which has been through this, which is, later on the kid. And he says, I don't want to talk about it. In many ways, like, you wouldn't understand. It's horrific. And it is horrific. But when you load it up with that much value of how horrific it is, it's tough to live up to that because you're setting expectations that then are being judged by the audience of, okay, well, that's not necessarily... Yeah, like, if you didn't set that up, and the cannibalism was a major surprise, and not that it wasn't a surprise, but it was like, we were expecting something perhaps much bigger. Mm-hmm. And it being a PG-13 movie, as you mentioned, it couldn't go that full weight that it needed to. And I think it's chasing this idea of something epic that never really fully manifests in this story.
Right.
And that's what I found frustrating because it should have been an amazing story. You got all the winning elements. You got Ron Howard, and you got Ryan, and you got Chris, and and I am a Massachusetts boy, so I like Nantucket, and and it was, I was all gun ho because the way Chris made it so much fun of, I need to be a captain. Whaling's great. This is what's gonna help my family. He doesn't get that, and then we're there. I'm like, ooh, whaling. Yeah, I forget we're doing actual whaling, and that was hard hitting, and so I wanted to see the full route.
I think in general this movie should have taken a darker tone.
Yeah,
I think that to get that desperation to live up to like this sin that he seems to be carrying around, you needed in general a dirtier, grimier, harsher look. A lot of how this was filmed, if you started at the beginning, I would almost think we're watching Pirates of the Caribbean, like these beautiful ships and clean tailored suits and everything looks so crisp and nice. And like they threw in like quick cuts of like dogs sniffing the ground and everything, but it was done in a way where it felt pretty. It felt nice. I didn't feel like people were grumbling around.
Well, Nantucket was and is a pretty seafaring town. I mean, Nantucket's an island that literally off of Cape Cod it takes
less than an hour.
Martha's Vineyard is about a half hour to 45 minutes, depending on what type of ferry you take. Nantucket's even farther out. I mean, it is an island. But it's a very beautiful island. And again, what the book also captured that the movie said that the whaling industry, like Nantucket was the Silicon Valley of whales. I mean, this is where all this oil, which was fuel at the time for lamps, there was no electricity and whatnot. So Nantucket really stands apart for being at that time an economical exporting giant. Like, that's where all this came from. And I think the movie sort of said that. But with that said, too, there were very rich people in Nantucket and there were not so rich people in Nantucket trying to
Well, here's
get around.
it's interesting kind of you say that, and we can start to get into more details about story and so on. But you said the book and the movie kind of told us that, and I think by having
the
the
book definitely does, yeah.
well, that's
The
what a book's
movie
supposed to do.
is-
But in terms of a movie, it told us things. It didn't show us things. So even going back to the whale and the skull and getting that out, yeah, it was gruesome. But we cut back and forth between our narrators, as they had to kind of be like, oh yeah, that was gruesome. Oh, definitely gruesome.
Yeah.
And it's like, just keep in the moment. Mm-hmm. And if we don't take that step back, then we get to feel it. But I don't need you telling me every second of the way cannibalism was bad and this is what we had to resort to, and you can imagine it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
I think that was an epiphany for me.
Yeah.
See, I didn't mind the cutting back and forth so much because I didn't think they hit it over the head a million times. Like, okay, it's still moving the story forward.
Sure.
And I saw it as it was a break from the sea, especially for all those long scenes that they're stranded and whatnot. It was good to have a break, literally, going back and forth between the past and the present so we don't feel adrift.
Yeah, I like the
and
framework.
lost throughout.
I actually enjoy the framework, even though that's not how Melville got his inspiration, but I got it for the purposes of this movie. I understood the framework that they used to, like the structure of how we're being told this horrific tale. And I guess, if I didn't say it correctly or if I didn't use the right words, when I was saying I didn't feel that it was dire enough, like the book, you just really felt that they're in a
Well, a book can
freaking
go into
lifeboat.
thoughts,
Right.
whereas a movie, it's tough to
Even
get thoughts.
but even with the cannibalism, though, in the movie, it's like we were saying, it was a lot darker. And I figured you could go the Alive route, which I think Alive was rated R. Look, do we need to see people eating other people? If it's a main part of the story in one way, shape, or form,
that shaped that character for the rest of his life.
Exactly.
Not only the kid, but every one of these characters.
Right.
I mean, the captain, right? The whole thing is, we're going to cover up this story and the weight of that, and he, hey, do the right thing, and then he's at the the confessional, or whatever we want to call it, and he says, it was a whale that got us. Like that is a hard hitting moment because he knows he doesn't want to cover up that horrific truth.
Right.
So
and even Nathaniel Philbrook in his researching this story, and he came to find out again as to how, like, this was an epiphany for him, and how am I going to put this into a book? And again, it's not, when I was reading the book, I had no idea of that aspect of it, and I'm sure as a moviegoer,
I don't think a lot of people did.
Well, no, but they completely hit it, because what's more, you have to advertise the exciting element, which is the whale element. I would hide the cannibalism as well. I mean, that's
agree.
a tough,
I
that's a
agree.
tough subject matter to put up in a trailer and going, yeah, they had to resort to eating themselves to survive.
I think they
That's
put
tough.
it in enough for us to realize how dark it got for them, those dark times. But also, I'm glad they didn't show it because, again, it is a PG-13 rating. Maybe
Right.
they were trying to just stick to the PG. So
Yeah.
if you had cannibalism, it would easily make it R.
Yeah.
I just think that this is the Disney version
practicality.
of what
Yeah.
it could have been.
I agree, and I look at this and I was kind of thinking about what are our more recent stranded ocean movies.
Well, there's
Ish.
Castaway.
You have Castaway, you have All Is Lost,
Life of Pi.
you have
we
Life
mentioned.
of Pi. You can have some more out there, and I'm like, well, what did I want from this that
Unbroken.
would separate itself from those? Life of Pi really went for the visual beauty and like the enlightenment element. Castaway is the dragging acting experience, and All Is Lost is like really watching someone who has these seafaring skills dealing with this and.
But each movie, though, is a singular movie. Like, where these are people, like, you're talking about 12 people or less.
Yeah.
It's,
But I guess what I wanted more from this is because there were so many people and because there was this element of whaling, I wanted to be really invested in the world.
Yeah.
And they kept it where I was never fully immersed in the world. And I don't know if that was because of the cutting back, as Phil mentioned, but I never really dived in as like a whaler from the beginning to the end. It was kind of kept too distant for me. Like, that's what I needed from this movie. For me to have loved it, it was good. It was a fine movie. But for me to have loved it, I needed that world to be more vivid, to be more gritty, to show that even if they had succeeded, even if they got what they wanted and there wasn't this twist of this giant whale, that this was still a hard life.
Yeah.
That this was still, from beginning to end, no matter what, this journey is difficult. Being out at sea is 2 years of difficult. They made it seem like, oh, if it was 2 years, this would have been beautiful, wonderful. The only problem we had was that we got hit by a whale and we're stranded.
Well, I also think they didn't spend enough time talking about the whale in the sense of, you know, when we meet the captain that had encountered the whale the first time and he's like, oh, don't go there. It became much more, they never had the, oh, it's just a whale, what the, you know, we can do this, and it didn't have that human spirit. I mean, I'm glad Marisa brought up Unbroken, because that whole first chunk was so well done in terms of how they would try to eat seagulls and this and that, and they were really worried about who was gonna die next.
Right.
Yeah. I definitely felt the desperation in this film, and also back then during that time of, you know, sailing and whaling and all that like there was a general law that had to be abided by, that if you are caught in that situation, the crew has to choose, or, you know, in this case for the movie they drew straws and whatnot, but they had to choose like who's the next person to sacrifice for the cannibalism.
Yeah.
Just for a means of survival. That is a general law. And I didn't realize that, but I found
Where
even
was
that
this law
fact,
written?
I had no, in the whaling rule book?
And in sailing back then, I guess. But that's what I found out after the fact. Now knowing that, I found it, okay, now the cannibalism, as intense as it was, like, I understand the purpose of it in this film.
Well, and I understood the purpose in the film and in the book. I mean, I knew it was coming in the movie, I guess. But again, maybe we had talked about it. I felt that the movie, it was almost like a cleaner version. It was definitely a cleaner version of the book. You know, and again, I appreciate how this movie was shot. I appreciate, you know, you're right. They didn't make whaling, like, whaling was the number one thing of commerce. Now, maybe it was a politically correct thing. I don't know. But in that time period, listen, if you're an audience member that's going in to see a Moby Dick movie, you gotta sort of kind of like take today's politically correctness out and go, for that time, it was the number one export in commerce for Nantucket.
It was a means of survival for everybody.
It was a means of survival, but in a sense, too, there was also a means of, to go on a whaling boat, it was a means of adventure. There was a spirit of adventure, of exploring, being out in the open sea. Call me Ishmael. I mean, he was coming into Nantucket to board a whaler for the adventure of it. And even that movie, Moby Dick, by John Huston, they even have scenes of them whaling, and it seems adventurous. Like, and this one, you're right. They didn't make there wasn't enough of the Nantucket sledding, so to speak, where they would harpoon a whale and the boats would, like, you know, the whale would, like, go, you know, tag the boat, and there wasn't an awful lot of that. And again, I just go wondering if they didn't want to show too much harshness, cruelty, but at the same time, it was a sign of the times. It was what they did to survive, you know, Nantucket. So you sort of kind of have to take yourself out of that.
Yeah.
They should have gone, you know, maybe a little bit more.
I think if they did, it would have made Chris Hemsworth character, when he doesn't harpoon the whale, it would have made it that much more impactful, because it's like, okay, he had the perfect opportunity to do that. And just I will give him credit, the way they made him look with all the scars and everything like that,
and the hatchet still above his eye.
Yeah, you know, they really did quite a number on that whale, but that whale has managed to survive, and he's like, I'm going to be different.
Yeah, you're right. And had they, I agree with you on that statement. Absolutely.
Go ahead, Sarah. Good.
Well, you just started bringing up Chris Hemsworth and his portrayal of his character. We talked a little bit about his accent. I liked I guess you could argue that this movie has 3 main characters. You have your narrator, his, I don't know, but it's not really his point of view, because once the story starts being told, it really goes more towards Chris Hemsworth's point of view. And then you also have the captain. So I think those are your 3, arguably. It was a little bit of a strange...
Whale.
And then the whale. And then it's a little bit of a strange switch going from... I thought at the beginning of the story that we were really going to get this from the viewpoint of a 16-year-old kid. And it was going to be what he saw. And it switches, and it's very much more what Chris Hemsworth or Owens saw and believed. I thought that as the 3 of them, they made them distinctly different. Age did that, background did that. I liked their circumstances that were all set up. I thought each actor had a strong performance. I thought I wanted a little bit more of our young narrator's point of view on the ship to kind of better connect to why he was telling the story or how he was privy to this information. Like, I wanted a little bit more of, like, maybe conversations he saw that he wasn't supposed to see, or pulling out from his angle what he was looking at. That character could have been fleshed out a little bit more, because I thought there was no reason that he was the narrator besides the fact that he was alive in there. Like, it could have been any other of the people who survived.
Well, I mean, for me, Tom Nickerson, who did write about this, and this is Nathaniel Philbrick used a lot of what Nickerson had written about for research. I mean, I felt like what they did with Tom Nickerson, the boy, was like, he was here on this whaling ship, and this could be an adventure for him, and, he was going to learn some seamanship, and I liked how Owen Chase was going to sort of mentor him through the process. He probably saw a little bit of himself, perhaps, in there. I like the whole Owen Chase, and even in the narrative at the very beginning where, he's telling Melville, he's like, this is a story of 2 men. This is the captain and Owen Chase. And we find out, and this happened a lot too, apparently, is that, you were born into whaling, and whether you were a good whaler or not, you would get a captaincy you were born out of money or whatever. So I like the dichotomy between Chase and I forget the gentleman who played the captain, Tom Holland, Thomas. No,
it's like the P. Pollard.
Pollard, Captain Pollard. I like that, and as far as Nickerson goes as the boy, it's like, we can't get into that whale skull. It's like, and he's like, you go ahead. He's like, no. He's like, either you do or So I got the sense that the little boy was learning, but then as this tragedy befalls them, for a little boy, that's a lot to take. And you can understand from a little boy how that could scar people and how it can scar an adult as well.
Well, yeah, his character was still at an impressionable age. He was supposed to be 14. So I understand he can grow up to be so traumatized in life.
Yeah.
But that didn't bother me. I completely understood each perspective.
Sure.
In a storytelling way that it didn't take me out of the film. Yeah. I still knew all the situations that they were going through, despite whoever was telling it at that point.
So, and we talk about Chris Hemsworth, and actually, in a sense, this is Chris Hemsworth baby. It was because of Chris Hemsworth that we even got a movie, because he was the one during Rush.
He gave the script.
Yeah, he brought the script to Ron Howard, and again, I think from a story standpoint, this could have made a great movie, like a really good, solid movie. I understand why. I mean, it's an amazing tale, that it just happens to be true, and that it inspired one of the most known novels in the history of novels is that much more adds to the legend of the Essex and the tragedy of it. I think the story elements are there, as you said, to make a great movie. Yeah. And that's the way Ron Howard felt. When he was given the script, he's like, yeah, this could be something that we could really do some good on. And Chris Hemsworth, obviously, Ron Howard respects Chris Hemsworth. They did a great job together in Rush. And I have no qualms. Like, the directing in this movie was good. It looked really solid. It looked really good. So I can understand why this movie was made and why Ron Howard chose to make this. I mean, he's a very human. Ron Howard's some of his best movies are the ones where it captures human nature, whether it be Parenthood, or whether it be Backdraft, or Rush, or Apollo 13. Like, he's great at capturing those kind of moments, and this sort of it's an Apollo 13 in the water. These people are stranded out there, so I can understand why he gravitated towards this story. So, the genesis.
I do too, but I don't know. Maybe I kind of find it a lot now too, where people are just so overwhelmed. I mean, Ron Howard, how many things does he have going on at any given point? So I think some of that, it really is in the detail, and it just didn't hit that way. And obviously there was a decision made. I think the number one key, PG-13 versus R. Had they gone just R, they would have been fine, because Rush was R-rated.
Yeah.
And that was wonderful.
It was.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah. I'm surprised, I'm still mad to this day that it didn't get more love than it did.
Oh, absolutely. And I've seen that movie a couple of times since, like, on cable and such, and it holds up. And anybody who sees it who didn't see it at the theater goes, this is a really good movie. I'm like, yeah, it is a really great story. In the Heart of the Sea could have been great too. Had they perhaps gone rated R. And I don't know, maybe they were afraid. Maybe when they made the decision to go, and again, I don't know what happened, but I know that it was pulled from release because they had tested it and they went 3D. And they went 3D on the movie. So maybe they had an R-rated movie that, because they made the decision to go 3D, they didn't want it to be an R-rated 3D movie. And but again, I also don't agree that the decision to go 3D on this movie, because I saw it in 3D. You said you saw it in Dolby Atmos?
I saw it in Dolby Atmos.
Was it 3D or just Dolby Atmos?
No, it was regular, but the sound quality was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was
to the point where I felt, in a way, just like, oh my god, the whale is attacking me.
It was ridiculous. Yeah, and did anybody else see it?
I just saw it 2D regular.
Yeah, and I can honestly say, and I'm a 3D guy, I'm an advocate for it when it's done properly. Right, it was done properly. It didn't look crappy, but it didn't. This movie I was watching, I didn't need to see it in 3D
because it wasn't about the whale.
No.
As much, it wasn't. If it was just man versus whale the entire time, it could have made more sense. But this wasn't about that. It was more about the humans.
Yeah, for me, it's I go into this and I'm trying to think of who I know that would absolutely love this movie. And the more I think about it, I'm like, well, if you really loved Moby Dick, like, you should see it, like, for the literature base. But it's hard to recommend because I can't tell if people are going to love it. Versus, like, I'm going to, like, if it was more to genre, or if it was kind of more of a niche, I felt like they kind of went too general with who they were directing this movie for. I felt like they were trying to say, well, yeah, we're going to make this PG-13 so families can see it. So it's both a male-female-driven audience, because we have Chris Hemsworth, so we should open up to female. I think if they had made this darker, narrowed this in more, it'd be easier to recommend, find people who would really love it. Because I know people who like this movie, but it's harder to see who would love this movie.
To go off of that, Ron Howard, because we know this film was supposed to be released March of 2015. It's December of 2015 when they released it. But Ron Howard actually quoted, after doing several screen tests and whatnot, he said, the way people responded to the marketing materials, they also looked out how the market expanded this last Christmas, so the previous Christmas, increasing a wide array of movies. There was a larger audience, and I wanted as many people to see this movie on the big screen as possible, and I do feel like that it's more of that fourth quarter, early winter kind of feel in terms of the tone of this movie. So he personally wanted it to be released this late in the year. So do you think that really affected the viewing experience of it?
But here's the thing. The problem is, unlike Unbroken, where it says in the title, right, here's a man that is unbroken by anything that has happened in his life. This is a man broken. And the human spirit of it all it doesn't necessarily triumph. Yeah, they got back, but they were all kind of shells of themselves.
Absolutely.
And so it's not necessarily the happy ending that you want for the fourth quarter.
Right.
Well, but also too though. I mean, my only counter to that is because we're in fourth quarter, we always get like movies like a Philomena. We get a lot of serious movies because it's all going in for Academy run. So, releasing it now, just because it's the holiday season, again, had it been done, it could have really worked. Like Spotlight is a
But
great
that's what I'm saying. It
example,
could
too.
have worked.
It could have worked.
It could have, but
the way it was released, maybe March might have been the better date.
Yeah.
I think so. And, because I'm trying to think of other whale movies, and the one that pops into mind is, Free Willy 1 through 3. No, but that's focused on, as the title implies, about the whale. And yes, you don't see necessarily the whale, but it's more about saving the whales. This is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And so it just tonally, it's all over the map.
Yeah, it is.
Do you think because the story obviously takes place years ago in like centuries, 1800s, it's obviously a very, very different time, just the way people viewed whales and animals now.
Well, that's what I was saying.
Now that this film is released in today's society and people have such strong views about animal rights, do you think that was also a problem?
Well, but that's what I was saying earlier about like the politically correctness of it all, because today we don't look at killing whales as like we look at that as really
survival,
bad.
we see
and it's really it's sort of hard to paint that.
Well,
like today, you can't make a current movie of whaling today because it just doesn't happen.
But take that aside. Here's the thing. There's ways, there's techniques. You don't need sympathy, but you do need empathy. And okay, why do I empathize with this character? And you can build your character up in such a way that, he might not necessarily like whaling, but it's the only means of survival for him. This is what he's raised to do. It may not be something that there's ways of doing it and portraying it that you could do it.
I also think you need to prepare your audience better. I think that they introduced the physicality of whaling too late in this film. For the point that
I think it's 40 minutes in.
Yes. And that, I was personally shocked by how much that first harpoon kind of hit me. I was like, whoa, that bothered me. It didn't bother me through the movie, but that first one was very jarring, and it happened so late. I think being introduced to how whaling was really influencing the oil, influencing the industry there, visual representations, not people talking about the money and the captains, needed to be seen.
Yeah, because that just shows greed.
Yeah, I didn't.
As opposed to necessity.
Yeah, because by the time that hit me, I was not ready for it. And it brought a negative feeling to that moment, which is your characters are cheering and are excited, and then I was negatively impacted because I was taken aback and I wasn't ready, so I couldn't be on board with my characters.
Well, they didn't make it, as we said earlier, exciting enough, because there is a sense back in the day, there was a sense of adventure in going to do this. I compared this movie, and again, I don't know whether they were done on purpose or not, but there was, to me, I found reference to Jaws. And there are a couple of scenes in the second half of Jaws when they're hunting the great white shark and they're on the orca, and they make it look, it goes from a horror movie to an adventure film. They're tracking down this shark, they got barrels in them. John Williams' score changes immediately to an adventuresome score as they're tracking down the shark and everything, and it becomes this, it's a high seas adventure. I was expecting, I guess, a little bit more of that in this, and had they shown that, I don't mind that they talk about the captaincy and the greed and all that, but had they gone out and had they had a scene where they were just whaling, they were just seamen, they were doing their jobs, and they were having, for lack of better words, they were having a good time. The adventure of it all, being out in the ocean and doing your job, and there was a manliness to it, heaving the whale up and getting the oil, and it was a good day's work. They didn't really have that to show, so that when we get to the part where the berserker whale goes nuts. That interrupts their workflow and this sense of adventure, because the sense of adventure now turns into a sense of horror. Yeah. And that happens in the book. Again, this is one of for me, one of the faults of the movie, because I didn't get that sense as much, although the whale attack was amazingly shot and filmed. And that was just, like, even in the way it's described in the book, he's just a really pissed off whale. And he's hunting that, like, he's just like, that's it. And I got that sense in this movie. It was just like a random.
It's a good scene.
Yeah, it's an amazingly
scene.
shot scene.
The ramming of that, the pulling down of the mast, like, that was handled very well.
Absolutely.
One of, I think, probably the best point of the movie.
It was amazing.
Absolutely.
Amazing. And, I thought how they shot this film, too. Again, one of the rare films. There was another movie we did earlier this year that was shot similar. It was shot in sequence. And they shot in sequence so to give the actors, so we can see the degradation, like we can see them losing weight. And, so when they leave Nantucket, to when they're out in the open ocean, to when they get attacked by the whale, to they go to the island, they get...
Speaking of that, I mean, Chris Hemsworth, he said this was one of the tougher roles that he had to do. Yeah. I think he ended up losing about 45 pounds, but there's an old joke, I think it was Tina Fey and Amy Poehler who said it, of like, when a woman has to lose 45 pounds, they just call that acting. When a man has to do it, he gets commended.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Very true. About the diet, actually, and on top of your point of filming it in chronological order for that, the cast, when they started the film, they were all working out, and they were all gaining weight, purposely gaining weight, and then while simultaneously filming, working out, and then progressively losing it really fast, but still retaining their strength, which as a cast, which made them bond even closer, because they were all in it together, suffering, but
they'd fight over the last carrot.
They got to the point where it was like a good competitive, that they kept each other and kept encouraging each other. It's like, hey, we can't cheat on our diets. We're all in this together, and we're all going to lose the weight. And it was very effective.
I want to ask you guys this, because I don't think we've ever talked about this, but like from a set perspective, right? Especially on intense movies, there's a right way to handle actors and the way you walk into set and so on. So like, just even from the catering perspective, like what do you have for the crew? Because obviously, if the talent sees that, and there's a whole buffet of ducks and turkeys and whatever, that makes your mouth salivate. You as an actor, if you're starving and like you're trying to think about cannibalism, but you see this platter of...
I'm going to go back to the thing you just referenced about women.
Very true.
But
Ron Howard did say in an interview, he had to be the director and still do everything, but he always felt bad that he would have to remove himself from the actors to go eat.
Yeah, I mean, he tried to be a brother in arms as much as he could, but and everybody else in the crew was eating. It was torturous. I mean, in fact, it affected Hemsworth in such a way. He says, I read a lot of scripts. He goes, now if I read a script that says, that even mentions the word skinny, nope. He's like, never again.
Bring on the Thor role. The Thor roles. I'm just going to eat pizza and work out.
Yeah, never again.
Get bigger.
So I appreciate his sense of humor. But it just sounded like there were days, they said, where they barely had the strength to even remember their lines. Because they were so emaciated from this diet. And it just seemed very, very hard to do. And Ron Howard, again, to his credit, I think he is an actor's director.
Well, he was an actor.
True. So
I think he gets it more than most.
Yeah, and I think he did it, from what he even said, he goes, I did my best. He goes, but, I had to go have a cheeseburger. When I said cut.
My question is, did the gauntness, skinniness, whatnot pay off for you guys in your experience?
I definitely believe it, because we saw the cheekbones of all the men who were, at the beginning of the film, very muscular and burly in a way. We saw the strength, and then to see them at that point in desperation in their physical, I don't want to say peak, but just that physicality that they are so weak they probably won't survive, I completely believed it.
Yeah, and when you added the makeup to their cracked lips and skin,
and they couldn't open their mouth. No water.
Yeah, I mean that to me very much worked, because you look at Chris Hemsworth's Owen Chase, like when they first get on the boat, and this guy's that's the other thing. There's no way I would have survived on a boat. I mean, there was just no freaking way. I mean, he climbed up that rope ladder, and I'm like, oh.
I like how they put him.
Yeah.
I liked how they shot it with there's the guy next to him, and the guy's climbing, and he's just like, squirrel.
Yeah, squirrel. Yeah, and so when you look at how his character, and even the way that he held a harpoon, I mean, he was like, he was the king of Atlantis, for crying out loud. And then when they're stranded, like what they all became, and when they get onto the boat, the way that they're walking, I thought the transformation was pretty incredible. I believed it.
Yeah, to that point, that was the first moment, as me as an audience member watching it, for his character, just a character development. He's the kind of person that will do anything to survive. They were just trying to leave the freaking port, and he had to go up and do, by any means necessary, get them out of there. So it established his character that he's the strong one who will do anything, what it takes in any situation.
Yeah.
And what Phil and we always joke about here is like wartime situations, like what you do in dire situations. He's that kind of guy.
He was the John Smith of the crew.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like, that's what he was.
But even that, when it got to the point in the film when he might also die with all these men, I still had that inkling that, like, he's a survivor.
Absolutely.
So I never really felt that he was actually going to die. I never really felt that complete peril for him.
You know what really stood out for me, and I think this is what could have worked more for the movie. When we see the captain and his cousin, and they're supposed, he's supposed to shoot the captain, and he doesn't want to do it, and it's kind of the way they play it out. It's very drawn out, and then we obviously kind of see him shoot himself in the head and fall. And rather than cut away, we're still kind of on it, right? I feel, especially for those scenes, had we just stayed a little bit longer on it to the point of uncomfortability, it would have worked just slightly more. Because that scene did work because of that reason. Yeah,
absolutely. And I agree. It just goes back to they soften the blow. And again, how do you portray cannibalism? And how do you bring this? Again, this movie isn't Alive, where Alive, they didn't shy away in the marketing of saying this is a movie about this soccer team that plane crashed, and this is what they had to resort to live. So when you went into that movie, you were sort of prepped for what you were going to see, as harsh as it was. Both book and in this movie, in today's world, to market cannibalism, it's tough. It's tough.
Well, on your point of why they didn't linger on a lot of scenes, and I think that comes from there seems to be a lot of fear or judgment about a movie not keeping up the pace. In a time where so many movies are action, let's go, let's fit 5 plots in one movie and keep things moving, I think that sometimes there's a fear to take too long or make it seem like they drag. But in a survival movie, you need those beats. You need to feel that is a technique. That's something that gets you more engaged, makes you feel that strife. But I think it comes from people. People are like, oh, but is the pace okay? Like, is it too slow? Yeah. And that becomes a worry that I think probably affected this film and not the best way. I think
the gift, ironically, of movies from last year, I think that was so wonderfully drawn out.
Yeah.
That was a horror movie. Well,
it's a thriller.
As much as you can call it that.
It's a suspense thriller, absolutely.
Yeah. I thought that did a good job.
Yeah, I agree. In this movie, again, I like this movie to an extent. I wish it had gone a little bit more into the direness of this situation that these folks are in. But then again, reading about how this was filmed, filming it in sequence, so we capture our actors in their, as they're declining.
Becoming amazing.
But the other scene too that was from a visual effects standpoint. So they filmed a lot around the Canary Islands, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. They suffered 1 day or 2 days of a major storm that came in that shut down production. But the entire shooting schedule was about 73 to 78 days. They came in on budget. I think they only went a day over, and that was because of the storm.
And that's pretty good feeling.
Filming with water, but they did a lot on sound stages
And Pinewood,
as well.
right?
I forget the name of the. I'm not sure it was Pinewood. It was a soundstage in
Levinson
England.
Studios
Levinson
in England.
Studios, yeah.
There you go.
And so one of the scenes in particular was the scene of when the whale attacks and they're in the whaling boat, and it's the iconic scene. It's we don't have it here, but it's one of the posters where the tail.
The tail.
Yeah.
Is in it. So that alone, that scene, they used they shot it, a lot of it on a stage. They did CG a lot of the water, but they mixed it in with live action footage of water off the coast of Morocco. Then this whole scene took about 100 days to render, to shoot, and then including the rendering of just that tail in the water. And that to me was pretty. I thought that was a pretty cool and intense. Like there was a lot of detail put into that, and I also like too that Ron Howard thought of the whale as he thought of the whale as the character almost like of Clint Eastwood in High Plains Drifter. It's like this guy's just going along his way, he's just doing this thing. He goes in, comes out, and I was like, well, that's an interesting mythical property to give to a whale as from High Plains Drifter, and comparing them to Clint Eastwood in a sense. So, getting all these people together, the composition of the shot, 100 days just to do one scene that's 15 seconds on screen? With that tail coming up and slapping down.
Yeah, they had a team of 65 artists for the visual effects that had a total of 27 minutes in the film of all visual effects.
I thought that we mentioned the whale taking down the ship was one of the greatest scenes, but their handling of the whale stalking, of the whales breaching, all of that I thought was done very well. I was convinced that there was going to be a shot where we were going to see a human underwater in comparison to the whale underwater, which I was kind of waiting for.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because in the marketing of this movie, they had, I thought, one of the most visually striking billboards was the man underwater with the harpoon and this big in the eye.
Yes.
And yeah.
And I was waiting to see it, and it never happened. And I was like, did I blink? Did I miss it? But I was waiting because it was in the marketing.
It's such a striking billboard and image. Mm-hmm. And again, I was like, marketing wise, I think they did a relatively good. They did a good job with the print. However, the marketing didn't work necessarily because people didn't really go to the movie. So I don't know how you would have retooled it, but I think the making of this movie is very fascinating, and what they did and how they recreated Nantucket.
Yeah, I think going back to the whales and seeing the whale attack, and like those scenes and how they actually purposely filmed the whale. Mm-hmm. Ron Howard said in his directing that he purposely had it over the shoulder of a lot of the cast members. So we, the audience, always saw that perspective, the same perspective from like a sailor on the ship. So it built that connection between a man and a whale. So we felt it when the whale was attacking someone on screen. It was also attacking us, which I definitely felt that.
Yeah. Now, sound-wise, you talked about sound. You saw it in Dolby Atmos. The
Yes.
theater that I saw this in 3D also had like an RO sound kind of a thing. And the sound mix on this movie was very deep, heavy. I felt like I was being I felt like I was on the boat. I heard every creak, even prior to the whale attack. I heard every creak on this boat from around. Yeah, the sound design in this movie was amazing.
I felt like I was drowning.
Yeah.
Which is not a very good sensation. But it was great. It was very effective, I will say that.
I like how you said that whole thing, just really smiling, like I was drowning.
Well, even the first shot of the film, because I knew it was Dolby Atmos, I was like, okay, this is going to be crazy. It's going to be so much water. But even the first shot, I was already taken aback, and it was jarring because the first shot, you're already underwater feeling like a whale.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know about this. This should be interesting.
Well, Anthony Dodd Mantle, who was the cinematographer, too, I mean, he made the movie look really great, and they did a great job, I thought, matching from from when they were on location at the Canary Islands to when they were filming in a film stage with water, and having the boats actually on gimbals. And they said one story was because they had people up on like let's say the rafters, or they were in the sails, but it was actual crew, and the thing was rocking so much that the crew got sick. And they started literally throwing up on cast and crew on the ground. They're going, "Is it raining in here?" And they're like going, so when you talk about an arduous shoot and trying to stay steady. Even Chris Hemsworth said it was hard. He goes, they had this boat rocking and Ron Howard wanted to bring this authenticity. And again, I felt while on the Essex, I really felt that they captured the feel of what it's like to be in a rocking ship, and it could not have been easy, even in even with heated water, if it was even heated, to be in. And even the whaling boats themselves were on gimbals, so that they could move the boats any way they wanted, and Ron Howard would film. And they had he was using the cinematographer was using for the first time, he was using a Panavision. And he basically used a Panavised Arri Alexa XT, and they shot it in 4:3 mode with 2K resolution. And then the 1.85 aspect ratio was, he said that it was extracted, and they had to use these Panavision prime lenses, and Primo zooms were used for when the cranes were put into play. So there was a lot of camera movement going around. And to his credit, Ron Howard caught a ton of great angles, right?
Yeah, and also the director of photography, the DP, he purposely put little cameras throughout the set so the actors never really knew if they were in frame or not. But it got real authentic shots of the actors in their environment.
So now I'm going to go back and watch and see if I can spot all of the hidden cameras throughout the set.
Yeah, and they're using different filters. He said the biggest problem, because water can be hardened camera equipment, but Panavision's proximity to the set was a plus. Panavision helped me find lenses, and if we tore them up, they would repair them, send them back. So there's a lot of wear and tear going on, whatever equipment they had. But again, it just goes to the arduousness, the difficulty of the shoot doesn't necessarily only affect our talent, but a cinematographer and the other crew members who have to be on this to make sure that they're getting the shots, the lighting, the booms. I mean, it's a high seas adventure.
It was not easy for the cast because they were on such a low, strict diet that Ron Howard said at one point that they all were constantly throwing up, to the point where when they were filming and all the rocking back and forth, they had no food to throw up anymore. They just felt straight up nauseous.
Right.
Like, oh, those poor guys.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and especially when when you shoot in rain, you're also going to be having to do that sound ADR. There's just no way around sound at that point.
Right.
You're just trying to mumble out your words, but no one can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Overall, do we want to start getting into? Let's talk about the score a little bit. I know we talked a little bit about sound, but score. I thought the music was good. It's not necessarily memorable like Star Wars certainly isn't, but at the same time, I think highlighted the movie in a nice way.
I think the music was, as I always say, I'm a big fan of instrumental music, especially when used effectively, and I thought it was so well placed throughout this film. I think one of the main first moments of the movie where I really felt the music and really heard it was when the storm was coming in, and they were already out in sea. It was that big storm that the captain refused to put down the sails. And
that
whatnot.
looked good because that was
yeah,
literally
that was
a
awesome.
wall.
Yeah.
Visually, it was awesome. The sound was amazing because I felt like the storm was coming. There was literally a swell in the music score. I was like, oh my god, we're gonna get swamped by big waves that are coming. I felt it at that. It was so well done.
Yeah.
I think that my music interpretation of this film really did get swayed more toward the sound and the sound effects of it, where just the wind and the sails and the splashing and the water and the crashes, all of those really resonated with me. It wasn't as much with the score, the undertones that I was taken away like that way, but just those sounds of the world, I felt were very authentic.
Same.
And there was and as you mentioned, there was tons of them.
Yeah.
Tons.
Yeah, it was sort of reminded me, and oh my God, I feel horrible. The composer who just recently tragically passed away in a
James Horner.
James Horner.
Yes.
There was some of it that reminded me of James Horner and what he would bring to screen. I enjoyed the score, but again, for me, to what we were talking about earlier, I wish that there was a little bit more score to accentuate the adventure that these men were going on. Because in a sense, this is what you're signing up for, whether you're escaping your life and being, whether you're a convict or whatever. You're signing on to something that's the other incredible thing. You're signing on to something that could be 2 years of your life away from the mainland or away from your family or those people that are closest to you. And again, you sign up for that if you're choosing that as a profession, there's got to be something in there that makes you that you just love the sea so much. And and again, there were times where I wish that the score had been a little bit more adventurous to highlight this is why these guys are going on, because otherwise that's one of the shittiest jobs that you could have had, that takes you away so far away. And in part, because I was reading about it, it was because of Nantucket. Nantucket, because it became such a huge export, they've pretty much whaled all of the whales out of that Nantucket region. They had to go farther out. They had to go, and that's why these trips, before they were saying, bystanders can watch from Nantucket shores as they were whaling off the shores. They were forced to go to these great depths and lengths to find whales and bring
near
back
the
oil.
equator.
Yeah.
That far.
Yeah, I mean, and when if you look on a map too, where Nantucket is compared to where they ended up, and then when you're in a whaling boat stranded, where you have no idea where you are, it was a miracle that they were ever even found. When you think about it,
I think musically, with taking risks, I think that they could have made a stronger choice with maybe some sort of theme attached to the whale. I'm not talking Jaws level, but
I know what you're saying.
But some sort of hint or some sort of cue. It could even have been a silence, but some sort of repetitive cue for the whale being there. Just because there were certain points, the first time that Owens recognizes that they're being followed by the whale. I believe it's actually in a storm or some sort of thing, and it's just a glimpse. And you almost wonder if he's losing his mind or if it's true. But I think that some sort of
Well, I think sound design-wise, you have the blowhole. Yeah. Right, I mean that's the most besides the top fin, but that's also reminiscent of a shark. But the blowhole
blows.
Yeah, I just think I could have used maybe a stronger sound cue for when he was around, and even remembering, because once they reach the point they've been stranded, they're on lifeboats. You get the glimmer of the whale in the storm. Then you have a large portion of being stranded without really inclination of the whale until they're closer to the island. Right. I think if you had some sort of, because I don't think you're not going to do a visual one, but some sort of sound cue to remind you that it could still be there. Yeah. It could have been a nice theme for the movie.
Well, Roque Banos was the gentleman. He did the music, and I will say this: where his music score worked for me were those quiet moments of the movie. Mm-hmm. Whether it be a Nantucket between Wishaw, then Wishaw is Herman Melville, who was I really enjoyed the interaction between those two men and Caitlin Stark. Which ironically, when we talk casting, it is the same casting director who does Game of Thrones. So hence there were a couple of Game of Thrones people in this movie, but I really did like Brendan Gleeson. He was their interaction actually, to see Brendan Gleeson sort of kind of relent and melt down and start telling his story. I thought, and again, that's why I like the framework of this story, for the structure. I like that. I liked in Wishaw as Melville, and I liked at the end of it where he says, "Well, do you have your story? You're going to use all of it," and he's like, "I'm going to focus on the whale." You know, I'm gonna there's not gonna be any cannibalism in Moby Dick. I'm gonna focus on the whale story and everything else. But
Moby Dick is basically like the sequel to this. Right? I mean, it's after the first session of this go around.
Yeah.
I also think that one thing that this handled well, besides the framework, was I was kept surprised by who was going to stay alive. Mm-hmm. That was something that I thought that they did a nice job of hiding. I did believe that anyone could die in this, besides our narrator. I was not concluded that Owens was going to make it to the end. I really did think that any of these people could die, and I liked having that feeling.
I will say this: I read the book, and it looked like they were going to kill off Owen Chase, and I was like, wait a minute, no, he's got to be, he's got to be alive. I knew he made it back, but they're going to kill him off. You're right. There was a question mark as to how they did that. Cillian Murphy, too, who I didn't know was in this movie, so it was a nice, pleasant surprise to see him in this movie, because I thought he did a really good job as support. And it was, for me, I did feel there was a touch of sadness when Owen had to leave his good friend behind, but I like the fact, because I happened to, I promised that I'm going to make sure to have somebody come back. But as an audience member, as watching the movie, even had I not read the book, I probably would have said, yeah, he's not gonna be back.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. The whole idea is we don't know who was gonna survive and whatnot. I think that was very well established. I think it was also more effective for when they were rescued, and then they had the 3 months of recovery, and the guys getting off the boat. That's when the audience found out who survived, and I thought that was actually really well done. And I was like, okay, this person's still alive, this person's still alive, this person's still alive, and that's what I think was really well done.
Were you pleasantly surprised or surprised at all?
I'm glad the cousin died, though.
That the three men who elected to stay on the island were still alive, because they survived as well. Yeah, because it comes back.
I didn't remember that they stayed on the island. I thought just the one guy did to die. I forgot that there were still people on.
Yeah, 3 more people went back to the island.
Yeah. Completely forgot.
Another great story that this might actually make a better movie than this would. Ernest Shackleton's story.
The Shackletons,
Yeah, read about it if you don't know. It's quite interesting, especially with the whole leaving people behind. Yeah. I won't spoil it too much.
So, and again, Moby Dick, too, always thematically, well, look, for me, again, Moby Dick, watching the John Huston thing, but Moby Dick thematically also makes its way into Star Trek many a times. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan is very much Moby Dick, with Khan hunting his white whale, which is Captain Kirk, and he even quotes Moby Dick. And even in Star Trek First Contact, there's a scene where Alfred Woodard confronts Picard and says, all right, go ahead, go get your white whale. So through pop culture, Moby Dick has lasted, as hard of a book as it is to read. The themes of Moby Dick and what revenge can do to a person. And the mental drive that it can do to a person permeates throughout our pop culture, even to this day. So, the importance of that, it's just learning that story behind it. And that's why I sort of wish that this was the bigger movie, because I really do find that, In the Heart of the Sea, I know as a book, I wish that as a movie, to your point, I guess, it wasn't as epic. It wasn't as big. Like, for a holiday movie, I wanted there to be some heavy drama. I knew that there was cannibalism. This could have been a great movie. This could have been a much better movie with all the talent involved.
I mean, I look at it, if Moby Dick is one of the great novels of the world, this should have equally been one of the great movies, perhaps.
Of the season.
Yeah, at least of 2015.
Yeah. I was hoping. When I first started seeing the trailers and I knew that they were making a movie and Ron Howard was directing, and Chris Hemsworth, I'm like, yeah, I'm in. Like, this is such a great cinematic tale, and for the cinema, it did look good.
Let's talk about the reception, right? We've obviously kind of We've given our opinions of it.
We all saw it.
But let's talk about Marisa. You got some stats right in front of you. Let's go to you first.
I do. For reception, IMDb has 7.2, which that's actually pretty fairly high. Rotten Tomato gives it 41 on Rotten Tomatoes, but 64 in audience.
Yeah, and it got. I mean,
about
for me,
right.
40.
Yeah.
I don't know. 41%'s a little bit low.
That was a little low.
I would have maybe
58.
58, high 50s, 60s.
Yeah. And in fairness, I went into this film knowing it was already that low, so
Right.
it kind of ruined my expectations.
Yeah.
In a good way, because I walked out with
I got
fairly
you.
lower
It lowered your
expectations, but
expectations.
better results.
I was disappointed when I started seeing those reviews come in because this wasn't one of those movies I was looking forward to this holiday season. So when those reviews started coming in, and a 41% is not that, you don't necessarily expect that from a Ron Howard movie as well. You know, Cinema Score got a B+, which is interesting. You know, for this movie, it's not horrible, but it's not going to garner the word of mouth to fuel it through the rest of this holiday season. You know.
Yeah,
it's one of
numbers
those things-
aren't hauling it through the rest of the season
Yeah.
either.
My thing is, because, I'm a big fan of Ron Howard himself and his work, being a big Parenthood fan myself, and that show is that I knew about Into the Sea for a long time. And knowing that it's been pushed so back, I've been just waiting for it.
Yeah.
And then now getting from other people's opinions that it was such and not the best movie after I've been waiting for it so long, it kind of ruined it a little
I know,
bit for
doesn't
me.
it? Yeah, I hate when that happens, when you look forward to a movie like that.
I mean, it's when I saw, because I saw the numbers before I went, and every time I kind of see that, but I'm excited to see the movie, not just this one, but anyone, I kind of want it to be wrong,
Yeah, me too.
and I'm pushing for it to be wrong, and it was kind of right.
Yeah, kind of. And how many times, though, have we talked about a movie where we look at it going, wait a minute, that's what are they looking at that we missed? Because we really might like the movie more. And I agree with you. It's a healthy way to try to go in a movie, especially if it's from people that you admire. You know?
I mean, this had definitely some creatives on board. It's not making the money that we assume was invested into it.
It was about $100 million.
Yeah.
It's not like some studio came down and said, this needs to be made into... This was... You could call it a passion project, and so maybe that's the thing that hurts the most, is that I expect a little bit more from a passion project.
Yeah.
It definitely was a passion project because, I follow Ron Howard on social media and whatnot, being just a fan of him. And he was posting pictures of, promotional things of this movie in January of 2015. It's already December of 2015.
I have some interesting things, and I want to talk about numbers, and then there's an interesting breakdown of how the numbers came from. But there was a commentary that I had read that actually sort of kind of angered me. So I'll get to that in a second, but we should talk about, thus far, the movie opening up. It opened up a week ago or so we're talking December 11th, right? Mm-hmm. So this movie domestically thus far has made about 15 million. I mean, it came in number 2, and it only did 11 in its opening
It was
weekend.
a really low weekend, low weekend when that came out.
People were expecting that movie to do a little bit more than 11. The movie cost about $100 million or so to make. Then, even worldwide, the movie's not. I mean, worldwide, we're looking at 55 million thus far. It's the foreign box office has been far higher than the domestic, and I'm not sure whether that's a Chris Hemsworth pull.
I think it's definitely Chris Hemsworth.
But again, just going into just stats alone. I found that there was an article that said how younger moviegoers sank Ron Howard's In the Heart of the Sea. So, $100 million adventure film. More than 45% of Heart of the Sea's audience was over the age of 50. So that's more than 45%, according to exit polls. Showed that those under the age of 18 made up 8% of the ticket buyers, while those between the ages of 18 and 24 made up 9%, and only 15% were between the ages of 25 and 34. So when you're going to make a $100 million epic movie. It's interesting because this article goes, what were the analysts when they were making the deals to put this together? What were they looking at? In order to say, hey, we'll put $100 million into this. It's just, and again, I think it goes to what we were talking about, PG-13. Like they obviously were trying to go for a broader audience that PG-13 would have brought in. Again,
but restricted them in so many ways.
Here's the thing. Like, in one ways, I like stats, and I think there's a lot of meaningful stuff in it. But other times, I think people dig so deep for an answer to it that just make a damn good movie, and people will go see it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, there's plenty of examples, unfortunately, that we've seen where we as a panel are being like, "Why people aren't seeing this movie? It's a damn good movie. Go see the damn movie." But so I get it, but at least, I don't know, make a good movie.
Yeah, or a better one. I mean, I think all they did was make maybe a good movie that could have been
great.
Yeah.
Could have been better. So now the commentary that I was reading, and this one sort of kind of peeved me. Again, they don't quote the source. Like, they don't say who the source is, but it's somebody who has knowledge of the project. And this person, whether it be I have knowledge of the project, quote unquote. It's a very old-fashioned. It's a very old-fashioned movie, and one that doesn't connect with Chris Hemsworth's audience. I counter with, well, what is Chris Hemsworth's audience outside of Thor? He had Rush with Ron Howard. We talked about that. A very underappreciated movie. That younger audience did not go. Not much of an audience went, unfortunately. Black Hat, he did.
Bomb.
Didn't do very well at all. So what audience is this going for? But then this person goes on to say it's a bad match of material and filmmaker, which that I completely disagree with. If they've had a history of Ron Howard movies, I mean, that upset me a lot. If the story, and then he goes on to say, or she, if the story was placed in new hands, made for slightly less with an incredibly fresh take. A fresh take on what? This is an adaptation of a book put in new hands. He goes on to quote, the way Guy Ritchie put his spin on Sherlock Holmes.
What, you want a more modernized version?
Yeah, you could not have modernized this movie. Like, what is this guy or woman talking about? It incensed me, and it almost reeks of ageism to say that Ron Howard, he's lost touch with movie-going audiences, which I don't believe in my heart. I think he's a solid director. Directing tech from this movie was not the issue here.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. It really bothered me.
I mean, I think that this person is wrong, but I do think that there is something to say, because my biggest problem with it is that the tone of it doesn't match. It's not dark enough. It's not gritty enough, and it's not consistent from beginning to end. And that, I'm not sure if that's directorial or if that's from studio trying to make it more general.
Well,
I don't know who that is, and I'm not going to place the blame, but that's my problem.
I think the push to make it 3D says it all. Warner Brothers wanted this to be broader. Mm-hmm. They felt that by going by 3D, they could get that younger audience to come in. They were marketing it as this is today's version of Moby Dick. Mm-hmm. It's going to be 3D. It's going to be an adventure, a survivalist. But they didn't really, I don't know how you pump up the drama in this. From the beautiful billboards that we saw, it looked very fearful. It looked very thrilling, which this was a drama. There was very little thrill outside of the whale attack, which was thrilling. The book is a heavy drama, which, to your point, they did not make it heavy enough. And by going 3D, you instantly say, we're going to make this safe.
We're not going to focus as much about the intimate conversations.
Yeah. We're going to make cannibalism safe. Although there was one great shot, I felt. It's when Captain Pollard's whaling boat was rescued. And the people are looking over, and the boat starts to come in like it's floating by. So you see it from bow to stern. And you see, like, Pollard's just, like, there. He's, like, the only one that... And you just saw human bones all around him, and then you looked up and like the look on the faces. That was a very well done scene. It conveyed its message. There should have been more, like out in the open sea. The direness of their situation could have been more.
Yeah.
So, there we go.
All right, let's do last thoughts because I feel we're running out of steam in our sailboats.
You're so punny.
I could talk about this movie for another 5 hours.
Well, you're certainly welcome to.
I could talk about fun trivia.
Go ahead, Marisa.
Yeah, I want to know fun trivia. Yeah.
Because as we all know, Ron Howard did also direct Apollo 13. But while doing the research for Apollo 13, NASA actually used whale oil in the Apollo missions because it was used as a lubricant because the oil derived from the sperm whale's brain has amazing properties of viscosity that are very hard to synthesize. That's why oil from whales' brains is so highly prized, and it's why you see in the men in the heart of the sea go to such harrowing lengths to secure it. Like, okay, I get it. So whale oil is still a very, very precious commodity. And then for the
Japanese, certainly.
Yeah.
Let's
Let's
go
not
there.
go there.
Well, I'm just saying.
No, I know.
Check out. I mean, the Whale Wars. I used to watch that.
Yeah, I
And it's
know. And you used to
thrilling.
talk about it too.
Hey, you know what? It was a decent show.
Yeah, and for Tom Holland, who played the younger version of Thomas Nickerson, for the scene that he had to go into the whale, they actually built a prosthetic whale of like 2 scale, and he had to go in. It was all lubricated and oily and whatnot, and because he was also losing weight too, he didn't have a lot of strength.
Yeah.
And so when he equated it while trying to get out after every take, it was kind of like going up a slide, but he's all lubricated to the point he couldn't do it. So he was stuck in the whale for like a good solid 20 minutes until
awesome.
the crew finally gave him a rope and like had to keep pulling him out every single take.
That's awesome.
They should have recycled that for Pinocchio. Made a live action Pinocchio. Hey, we got a whale. Didn't go. Who wants to use this?
Yeah, he said while filming that it was an interesting experience, and he not something he didn't want to shoot again because he did it so well. He thought it was done, but Ron Howard, maybe a few days after they shot it, he had to go back up to Tom Holland and be like, "Hey, that was a great scene, but we got to shoot it again." So he had to go back into the whale. I felt so bad for him. That was fun to read. And then, even Ron Howard himself, he said when he was younger, he had to read Moby Dick, but he realized his teacher in school gave them the abridged version.
Comic book version.
The abridged version. And so when he was doing the research again for this film, he was like, I didn't realize how difficult of a book it was.
Yeah. Even to this day.
Yeah.
Let me throw in, I'm going to, again, maybe I was looking into it too much, or I'm so close to the movie Jaws. I found at least 3 sort of kind of Jaws references. And I'll start off with, talk about Jaws first. And there's a scene in Jaws when the crew of the Orca encounter the Great White for the first time. And Hooper, played by Dreyfus, says, it's a 20-footer. And Quint goes, 25, all like 3 tons of them. In the movie, while they were out in the whales, one of them goes, that's a 40 barrel. And Chris Hemsworth goes, nope, 50. That's a 50 barrel, like, talking about the size of the whale. So, I don't know if it was a conscious thing. That's the way I looked at it. There was another scene in Jaws as the Great Whites has attacked the Orca. Hooper again asked Quint, he goes, you ever have one of these do this before? And Quint, who's the seasoned fisherman, is like, no. And there was a scene in this movie where somebody asks Hemsworth, and he goes, have you ever had a whale do this before? And he's like, he just nods his head, no, because as they were under attack. So that was my other one. The other one is a big stretch because in Jaws there is dialogue about what it is to be an islander between Ellen Brody and one of the islanders, and she goes, Ellen, you'll never be an islander. If you're not born on the island, you're never an islander. And in this movie, Chris Hemsworth, who is a mainlander, they made a landman. Yeah, he was like a landman. He wasn't like considered, and that was one of the things too that held him up from captaincy because he was not born of the island, so to speak. So those are maybe it's a stretch. I don't know if it was intentional, but that's the way I saw it, as reference to
Fair
a
enough.
great seafaring adventure.
I mean, you
Josh.
certainly make a good case for it. Whether or not they actually did,
I
who
don't know.
knows?
Yeah. Just a couple more things on the whale itself.
The whale?
That they had a lot of marine biologists and come in for the proper research, and one of them was that by the marine mammal specialists that they had, they actually, while doing the research, they realized they should make the whales even more intense for the film than they were expecting. Just because, like, studying the movement and the physical movements of the
Right.
whales, they're like, no, it's even grander than what we thought. And then, because we know this whale was white, but the way they showed it on screen, it was like more grayish white.
And in the book, he wasn't a white whale.
Yeah.
In the book, it was a sperm, like just a
It's a sperm whale,
yeah,
but
sperm whale.
while doing their research, they realized that some whales can have a skin condition that can make them appear almost white, and they
The
did it.
albino whale.
The albino whale.
Which is actually true.
Yes.
We did a lot of the quote unquote. They said we did a lot of research on this, so the encounter has to be a believable physical reality.
Yeah, and again, the whale looked fantastic. But I would
Scary.
recommend to our audience, and if you haven't seen it, I don't know if it's on Netflix. I don't know how you get it, but personally, I like the John Huston Moby Dick with
Oh, this is
Gregory
news to
Peck.
me.
What? Shut up.
You couldn't
No, it's-
like. You didn't like that one?
It's a song. Well, in the day, it was much maligned. Critically, the movie did not do well, and I think even box office it didn't do all that well.
For that film?
For Moby Dick. But
That's surprising because Gregory Peck, hello.
and I thought he did great as Ahab. I'll throw it out there too if you can find it. Patrick Stewart. In a 2-part miniseries, plays Captain Ahab in a television movie version of Moby Dick, which is actually pretty good too. So I recommend both those versions. Skip the book, watch the movie.
Or listen to the audiobook of the audiobook.
You wouldn't understand the dialect.
Nah. Anyway, Sarah, any last thoughts that you have to share?
No.
Okay, good for you. Fair enough. Well, thank you guys for joining us. If your thoughts differ from ours in one way, shape, or form, if you guys agree with us, if you guys want to expand upon anything that we talked about, have questions about anything we talked about,
Did we miss something?
that's what the comment section is for. We get the dialogue going, and we can continue it forever.
Mm-hmm.
And we're even around for the Blu-ray release. So if you didn't see it at theaters, which you should see it at theaters, but check us out after it comes out on Blu-ray.
Or Netflix, or whatever you watched it on in 2020.
Whenever you're listening to this.
Anyway, thank you guys for joining us. Have a good holiday season. Plenty of movies coming out. And yes, the big question on everyone's mind, are we doing Star Wars? Duh. Yes, so that'll be next. Check that out. Spread the word. And we've got Hateful Eight. We just did The Big Short. Joy, Son of Saul, Concussion, My Dear Lord, so many. And that's just Revenant.
And each of them looks to be really solid and good movie viewing for us. So.
That's right, a lot to look forward to. And that's just in 2015. Wait till 2016. So thank you guys for joining us. I believe this is Marisa's last of 2015.
It is. No, actually, Star Wars. I am doing Star Wars.
All right, she's
Sticking
doing
around for
Star
that.
Wars. Correction on Anatomy of a Movie.
Yes,
Marisa's doing Star Wars.
I had fun with watching this film. I'm glad I didn't get nauseous. And I'm also glad I didn't go into marine biology. So.
Excellent. And guess what? We're just one show of many. We're one ship in a fleet of ships here at Popcorn Talk. So whether it's Box Office Breakdown with Sara Stretton, whether it's Jedi Alliance with Mark Donica, who is engineering the show. Not that you would know that, but I'm telling you that. We have Marvel movie news, DC movie news, Disney movie news, not to be confused with DC movie news. Because people whatever. And so on and so forth. So profiles with Malone and Mance, and the list goes on and on. But it can be found at popcorntalk.com. See you next time. Bye.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the rest of the Anatomy of a Movie staff, we would like to thank you for listening and subscribing to the show. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email or tweet us. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been Anatomy of a Movie.